So the goodness paradox is the title of this book, and it refers as a paradox to the fact that humans are so extreme with regard to aggression and non-aggression. So we're extremely aggressive in the sense that, like chimpanzees, we have these demonic tendencies to go off and kill members of neighboring groups using our overwhelming power when we can get a big group attacking a small group and so on, in a way that that no other species, no other mammals do.
And in a way that horrifies us in retrospect often and makes us drop our jaws at our own behavioral possibilities.
Yeah, I mean, we're still living in the shadow of World War II and the Holocaust, and so for so many, I mean, almost everybody who writes about human behavior is affected by that, and still thinking about how did that come to be, and how do we avoid it in the future. So there's that angle on humans, but the other angle, which makes human behavior so paradoxical, is that we are the kindest and most tolerant and most gentle of animals. And people since the ancient Greeks have said we're like a domesticated animal. We meet strangers, we're so nice to each other, we don't have automatic aggression, we're nothing like wild animals. That
we share food and make that the basis of many of our social interactions.
Yeah. And so, for decades, well, for centuries, people have tended to solve this paradox by saying either that we are naturally aggressive and we learn culturally to be nice to each other, or vice versa. And so, the famous debate between Hobbes and Rousseau, as people put it now, Hobbes takes the naturally aggressive perspective and Rousseau takes the naturally kind perspective. And this goes on. I mean, there was a book recently published by a Dutch historian called Ronald Bregman, who's called Human Kindness, saying, well, actually, humans are spontaneously, naturally kind. So, it's absurd in retrospect to think that people are trying to arbitrate between these two views, that one is correct or the other is correct, because they're both right. I think it's very, very clear that humans have got tendencies for appalling violence, which will be elicited under the appropriate circumstances, regardless of what ethnicity or culture or religion you come from. And equally, it is very clear that people grow up to be spontaneously, thoroughly moral and kind and tolerant with each other. We have these two tendencies. And you mentioned this division between two types of aggression, proactive and reactive. It's a division that as you, as a psychologist, said, it's a familiar distinction. That's fine. But I will take credit for bringing it into biological anthropology, because people thinking about the evolution of human behavior, for some reason, did not apply it. Well, the short story is this. The way to think about human aggression and non-aggression is that we are relatively elevated for the propensity for proactive aggression, because all of the war and the Holocaust, stuff you're talking about, that's all proactive.
Right, that's planned, that's multi-party, that's organized, it's social, it's one group against another.
Yeah, and it follows exactly the chimpanzee principle of imbalance of power. You only do it if you can get away with it and feel very comfortable that you're not going to get hurt in the process. So, the killers of the Jews and the gypsies and the homosexuals in the Holocaust very, very rarely got any pushback. They were butchers. And that's the nature of proactive aggression. So humans are elevated for that in the sense that we have a very high propensity to do it if the circumstances are right, which is
right. And part of that circumstance is that we're defining the entities upon which that aggression is afflicted as outside what constitutes human, because within the human definition, all the standard rules of morality apply. And that's sort of equivalent, correct me if you think I'm making an error here, that's sort of equivalent to the chimp distinction between the chimps that are in their own group and the chimps that are from another group altogether.
You're right. And by the way, in a shocking addition to that, if you take the ethnographies of people living in small-scale societies, including hunters and gatherers and small-scale farmers, you find the same thing. You find that within the ethno-linguistic society, in other words, the people who speak the same language, we are humans, and the other people are not humans.
Right, right, and that's a very common. Well, and
Yeah.
I guess it's also partly because you can rely on those who are like you. It's almost the definition of them being like you, that they accept your definitions of right and wrong so that you can predict their behavior. You can enter into a social contract with them with implicit understanding, whereas with an outsider, you don't know what rules apply. And so their behavior isn't predictable, and they don't obviously fall within the overarching definition of moral. And maybe that's what, underlies the definition of human in some sense for us.
Yeah, I mean, that seems like a reasonable explanation, but the net result is that even a total stranger in a completely weak state, the first thing that you do, you're living in a small-scale society, when you encounter such a person, is not to say, here, have a cup of tea and let's find out your morals. It's to kill him.
Right, right, right.
So, I say this because there's a romantic view that among small-scale people, particularly hunters and gatherers, there is this extension of generosity of spirit to people of different languages, and you can argue very strongly against that.
So let me ask you a question that just popped into my mind about that. I mean, it's a compelling idea. I know that in the I think it's in Genesis, in the Abrahamic stories, there's tremendous emphasis on the hospitality that has to be shown to a stranger. And so that seems to be an exception to that general principle. And so
I think it's a definition of the stranger that's the issue. To me, what you're talking about would typically be a stranger who you do not know personally, but who speaks the same language as you, who's part of the larger series of Judaic tribes.
Right, right. So still encapsulated within the idea of what constitutes the central people.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that could well be. I mean, and obviously that's going to be the case from a historical perspective, because the idea of everyone who's morphologically similar being human, that idea obviously must have moved out from tribe to slightly larger group to larger group still, and so forth, as our groups got bigger and bigger. And and maybe we got some more.
We are all one world.
Right. Well, at least we do that to some degree.
Automatic enemy is horrendous.
Right.
So you really have to think yourself back into a very different past to understand this. So that's all proactive aggression. Proactive aggression, the use of power to damage anyone outside your group.
And then the reactive aggression that you described is also characteristic of many other animals who engage in male-to-male conflict. So that's not unique to human beings, and that involves emotional reactivity. It's impulsive. It's immediate.
It's defensive. That's right. It's all those things. So it's what we ordinarily think of as aggression, because so many people think of proactive aggression as something that is sort of just cultural and just human taught and that sort of thing. And even though there's very important cultural elements to it, it's part of our biology. But reactive aggression is what people, if you look up aggression in a textbook on animal behavior, it's almost all about reactive aggression, or often exclusively about it. So reactive aggression is testosterone fueled. It's losing your temper. As you say, it's impulsive.
It's motivated by anger. Not only by anger, but anger's anger, frustration, shame.
It's associated with emotions. That's right. Yeah. And what's striking about humans is that we are very down-regulated for reactive aggression compared to our close relatives. So, and the way that you can see this manifest is that the rate at which you get actual physical aggression happening in a small-scale society in humans compared to in a group of wild chimpanzees is 2 to 3 orders of magnitude different. That is to say, hundreds to thousands of times less frequent in humans than in chimpanzees, or in bonobos too. The famously peaceful bonobos, but nevertheless, bonobos are not nearly as peaceful as humans. So we have, we're way down the scale on reactive aggression, and at the same time, we're way up the scale on proactive aggression. And the goodness paradox is a story of how did we get this astonishing mixture? And I think, we actually have a really good story for it now, a really good understanding.